Welcome, everybody. We're going to get underway with this session, and welcome back to the ASITI Festival of Space, the Australian Space Industry, Technology, Infrastructure and Investment. My name's Chris Covage. I'm the Executive Editor with My Security Media, and it's been a pleasure to be with you throughout November so far. This is our second session for the day. We've got over 40 speakers from 4 different countries and 17 plus sessions throughout. And I'd like to start with giving an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, My Security Media and our partners acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. And hopefully we do have many watching. So thanks for those tuning into the live session. Just as we were warming up there, this session is being recorded. You're welcome to use the Q&A throughout if you've got some questions for our speaker today. And then also the sessions are available on ASITI.space as well as our upcoming sessions as well. And I'll leave the music going there in the background. Thank you very much to our speakers, our Festival of Speakers. As I mentioned, we've got over 40. So we're presenting quite a body of knowledge from across Australia and from other countries, obviously, as well. We had our US guest this morning from Kleos Space. So we're getting a really good insights into the Australian space sector. We'd also like to thank you to give a thanks to our sponsors, our platinum sponsor, Inmarsat, our gold sponsor, Fugro Spark. Our Women in Space sponsor was Lockheed Martin Australia, and our official media channel with the ASITI Festival of Space is our spaceanddefence.io channel as well. And without further ado, we'll get underway. And it's a pleasure to welcome Lloyd Damp back. He's the Chief Executive Officer with Southern Launch. And we're going to get a Southern Launch update. For those that follow us on MySec TV, we've had Lloyd on a couple of times. So Lloyd, maybe if you could come on stage. There you are. Beautiful, seamless. And it's great to see you again.
Thanks so much, Chris. Great to be on.
Wonderful. Look, let's do a screen swap if you'd like to take over, and
Sure.
and we'll moderate the sessions as well. And you might be able to get underway, Lloyd, and we'll moderate this session as you can.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thanks to everybody who's come online to hear a bit of an update from Southern Launch and to discuss some of the really interesting things that are happening in Australian space as we see them unfolding. So no further ado, let's jump to the next slide. Why isn't that working? Next slide. Does that work? There we go. All right. Thought it very important to just talk a bit about the market that Southern Launch is going after, so to speak, how we are approaching that market and looking to capture it, and then talk a bit about our main event, so to speak, which is the development of the Whalers Way Orbital Launch Complex, add in a little bit about our Kaniba test range, and then start to share some thoughts around where space could go into the not too distant future. So bear with us. There's quite a few slides at the start before we get into the nitty gritty. All right. So what we saw a couple of years ago, and this is coming more and more to fruition, is the demand for small satellites going around the north and the south poles of the Earth. This is in contrast to what has historically been done, which is very large satellites operating around the Earth's equator. And where we started to understand the market and have been designing our service offering is to provide a unique location from which to launch those smaller rockets with small satellites into orbit around the poles. And now, to do that, you can't just choose any location, right? Space launch is like property. It's all about location, location, location. And what you're trying to find is a location that has low air and maritime traffic, and very importantly is close to, or better yet, on the water's edge, so you can get out over the water. And importantly, from a polar launch perspective, you're actually far away, or as far as reasonably practicable, from the Earth's equator, because you don't want to launch with the spin of the Earth. You actually want to launch against it. Now, from that perspective, launching from the poles would be perfect because the Earth is spinning at the equator. So your equatorial velocity is 0, but there's not much up. Well, North Pole, you aren't over land, and South Pole, well, it's very difficult to get there. And so as you start to come in from the poles, you hit the bad weather. That's the 60 to about 40 degrees, the roaring 40s in latitude. And if you blink too quickly, you are too close to the equator again. So the perfect location is between 30 and 40 degrees. Lo and behold, that's where Rocket Lab in New Zealand are developing their launch capability, or have, should I rather say, and that is where the Whalers Way site is at minus 34.9 degrees. On the image on the left-hand side, you can see the different locations that are either established space launch facilities or currently proposed. So since the slide was originally put together, so the purple is proposed. The UK is now developing 6 space launch facilities. Norway's developing one. Sweden is all developing one. But they all suffer on the right-hand side. You can start to see all the different air and maritime traffic. So we believe that what we'd be offering industry or the market is a rather unique opportunity. So entering into this world is where Southern Launch operates. And so on this slide, you can see the 5 service pillars that we're developing. Front and foremost is our orbital launch capability. And the key goal there is to supply relatively rapid access into space. Primarily for us, safety is number one. Now, and I say relatively rapid because everything, for those who have heard me speak before, rocket launches are incredibly structured processes. So you don't just turn up one day and say, hey, over a cup of coffee, let's go out and launch a rocket. So you've got to it takes many, many months of planning, very large amount of input from state and federal regulators to ensure that your proposed activities will indeed not only satisfy, but from a Southern Launch perspective, exceed the safety requirements under all the relevant acts. So that's our orbital launch down at Whalers Way. Assisting us achieve that goal is suborbital launch. And with that one, the goal is, so suborbital, for those of you who might not know, means that you don't go into orbit, right? So from a launch perspective, you go up out of the Earth's atmosphere and then fall back down to the surface of the Earth. And that's what we do out primarily at Kaniba. And because Kaniba allows us to recover the hardware out over the land, which is quite a bit easier than to try and fish it out of the ocean. All of that work is then supported by an ability to then undertake mission and campaign design. And that means that we can help our customers doing all of the work required to not only license the launches, but also to move hardware onto the site to work out what day we'll be trying to launch on, and all the other goings on behind the scenes that make a complex operation come together. Where Southern Launch is very unique in what we do is we ensure that we understand, to make sure we understand how safety, technology security, and all those other key inputs to a successful operation come together is to actually be practicing individuals ourselves. So we provide rocket motor design, avionics hardware consulting out to a range of customers. And that means that we're always at the forefront of technology and understanding how the different bits and pieces can come together and be tested and potentially used on launch vehicles into the future. And I touched on it slightly earlier with the campaign design, but really importantly is developing all of the documentation, ensuring that all the processes and procedures that go with a launch campaign are acceptable to the different regulatory bodies. So that in itself is a hang of a lot of work. And it also has to be done properly. For a lot of people don't realize this or don't know this, but space launch technology is second only to nuclear technology in how federal governments around the world handle it. So very, very high level of oversight and input required from federal governments to enable rocket launches to move forward. So we then work with our customers across all these different service pillars to understand exactly what it is they're proposing to do and whether that fits within the requirements of Australia's launch permitting, or if certain modifications need to be done to be approved, or if there is no way, for example, that they would ever get launch license permitting in the current construct. So it is one large process that we usually work with our customers to step through that entire process. Now, for awareness, that can take anywhere from probably 3 months if it is a small rocket and isn't going to space, to over a year for a space launch at the moment. So there's a lot of work, a lot of discussions that go on to undertake safe space launches. So talking about where Whalers Way is, for those of you who are joining us from outside of South Australia, so dear old Adelaide is our headquarters. Looking at the image on the right-hand side, so there's Adelaide, and almost due west on the very tip of the Eyre Peninsula is Whalers Way. In relation to our Kaniba test range is up by that lovely K up at the start of the far west coast. One of the good things, well, the reason why we're going down towards Whalers Way is the weather down there is actually very conducive to supporting space launches, as well as the range area, both up and down range, are very conducive to these types of activities. All right, just to also give you a quick overview, and this ties into one of the first slides that I put up there. On the right-hand side, you can see some of the usual space launch vehicles out there used to carry things like Starlink, Tesla Roadsters, and other bits and pieces into space. So things like the Falcon Heavy, which is developed by SpaceX, and a lot of people will know what the Space Shuttle looks like to the right of that. That is where the majority of large rockets, or where rockets are sitting at the moment, and they're all designed to carry these very, very large satellites or clusters of satellites up into space. And where Southern Launch is working is around what's known as small and micro lift launch vehicles. So these are the images in black on the left-hand side. So comparatively, they are they're actually between a 10th and a 30th the size of what the world is currently using. And this means that they can be far more agile, far more responsive to a customer need. So if you think on the right-hand side are your big trucks taking cargo between different locations. You are looking on the left-hand side at a fleet of Ubers, for example, and they're able to ferry cargo to space on an as-needed basis. You're not stuck on the right-hand side, potentially to a set schedule. So very important distinction between the two. To launch these small rockets, you actually need a greatly reduced amount of infrastructure. So here are some of the concepts that we've spoken about in the past. But you can see that in effect, what you have is the launch pad from which you undertake the launch from. So that's where the rocket sits. And looking at the image on the left-hand side with all the different call-outs, that's the area up in the top right-hand corner, and that's supported by an assembly building in the middle. That, for all intents and purposes, is a shed. So you can start to imagine or understand that new space, as it's called, is truly shaking up how the world looks at space launch capabilities, because it's no longer specific bespoke infrastructure. You're now starting to look at more commercial off-the-shelf capabilities supporting a space capability. Off to the interesting bits. All right. So this, you can see the rocket that we attempted to launch back in September. It's known as a HAPIS-1 launch vehicle, and it's actually the second and third stages for a larger HAPIS-5. And all this is part of from a technology perspective, incrementally developing or testing capabilities before Australia ever does get to do an orbital launch attempt. From a southern launch perspective, the key one for us is to, this all came about because we wanted to capture noise and vibration data around what the potential effect a rocket launch could have done at Whalers Way. And when we identified that was a desire, we were then able to also engage with T-Space, who indicated that they had these vehicles ready to, that they were wanting to launch. So very fortuitous at that point in time. And most importantly, the rocket technology is what's known as a hybrid. So generally speaking, rockets use one of three types of propulsion. The first type is what things like the Falcon Heavy uses, which is liquid propulsion. That's where you have a liquid fuel and a liquid oxidizer coming together in an injector into a rocket engine that then produces thrust. There's lots of moving parts. There's turbo pumps. You know, it's very, very complex, but it's very, very efficient. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got solid rockets, and these are like the strap-on boosters on the side of the space shuttle. No moving parts. It's like a giant firework, so to speak. You light the inside of the rocket motor, and it burns. It very, very vigorously burns, but there's no moving parts, and you get a lot of thrust. With the liquid engine, you can throttle it like a car engine, but with the solid rocket motor, once it's starting to burn, that's it. It's going. So, and there's some really good reasons why you want to be able to throttle rocket engines, and it comes down to the way the rocket flies through the air. You might, for those of you who've watched rocket launches in the past, you'll hear someone announcing, you know, approaching max Q, which is max dynamic pressure, and that's the point where the rocket is subject to the greatest aerodynamic loads during the flight. And at that point, you actually want to be able to throttle back on the rocket if possible, so that when you do go through max Q, you're not slamming through it, but you're gently pushing through it. So with a liquid engine, you can do that. With a solid, nope, you're in for the ride. And this is where hybrid technology really comes into its own. So in a rocket like T-Space's HAPIS-1 on the right-hand side there, you have a solid fuel grain that you then pump oxidizer over the top of. And now you can throttle the oxidizer, but there are very, very few moving parts. So it has the benefit of low complexity, as well as being able to throttle, potentially restart even in space, and do other really unique activities which you otherwise wouldn't be able to do with a solid. So based on those reasons, we were like, wow, this is a perfect opportunity for Southern Launch. So these are some of the nice pictures that we captured in the lead up to the launch itself. And you can start to see some of the photos from inside our range operations point as we coordinating all the activities across the range. Sorry, and those are the pictures on the top of the screen. And down to the bottom and around, you can start to see down at the launch pad. So between the launch pad and the range operations area was about a kilometer. So nice long distance away. So everything is done remotely. And here's some more pictures from just different angles. So looking at the top right-hand image, the range operations point, you probably see that little blip. That is where it is up over there. So at the images on the left is part of range ops. So up at range ops, we had quite a few shipping containers and other portable buildings that hosted all of the teams, all of our different support services and the likes, so that during the launch event, we have full control over all of the actions and activities across the range. The picture on the in the top left-hand corner there, you can see the rocket on the big launch pedestal. Excuse me. Big tanks of nitrous oxide, flame deflectors, and other pieces of equipment that all help to ensure that not only can the launch proceed safely, but that we have a full understanding of all the different systems in the rocket and then around the rocket as well in that specific area. So quite a lot of time and effort goes into setting up and developing a rocket launch facility like that. So a bit of a launch breakdown for everyone's awareness. So we started the engagement with the space agency very early on in the year. Once we started to get indications from the South Australian government that there was a possibility that they would approve the temporary development of the launch site. After a lot of work, both with the space agency, state and federal regulators, on the 17th of September, the Australian Space Agency was the start of the launch window. So the approval was actually granted a month before, but under the Australian Space Act, there's a mandated 30-day period during which the space agency can then go and talk to other federal agencies to ensure that everyone is aware that the launch is to proceed. So a very, very structured process. The launch window opened on the 19th, and the jet stream was not perfect on those days. Sometimes like the operation of any vehicle, and this being the first time we're doing a launch out of Whalers Way, we were aiming for those Goldilocks days. So both the 19th and the 10th, the 9th and the 10th, my apologies, we scrubbed the launch, as the saying goes, because of the jet stream above Whalers Way. We then went down and waited till the 15th, so everyone could have a few days off, went down to the 15th, and unfortunately one of the systems didn't come online during the final stages of the ignition sequence, so that launch was halted. And then once again on the 16th, there was an internal fault in the rocket, and a small fire then broke out, which damaged the structure of the rocket, which meant that we had to retire that launch vehicle. So, but the good thing is that we still have 2 more rockets, or T-Space still has 2 more rockets ready to go into space. We're still working with the Australian Space Agency to go through those final steps of the space launch permitting process. So it's a bit of an insight into the setup for the launch, and then just I can't stress to people enough, just when you're getting into an actual launch campaign, and there's so many things to be aware of and to work through to try and make sure that everything comes together, and you have the best chance at capturing really, really good data. So while the first launch wasn't as ideal, it wasn't the ideal outcome, what we did then experience was that we were able to capture a lot of information still on that attempted launch. To give you an overview, so this is the Kaniba test range out near Ceduna, and just some indicative launch trajectories out on the right, and the range actually sits very close to what defence uses, which is the Woomera prohibited area. Now, interestingly, Woomera, or the Woomera prohibited area, is actually farming land, and it's farming land for most of the year, only when defence decides to turn it into WPA. So just fun fact. So what we're starting to do is then talk to people on how we could potentially launch further than the current train line, which is about 145 kilometers north of Kaniba. We were really excited that Kaniba, we're developing Kaniba in partnership with the Kaniba Community Aboriginal Corporation, and with the work with the community there, we were able to secure Australia's first space launch facility license on that site. And the engagement from the community, the training, the outcomes that we've been able to achieve there, we're really looking forward to expanding on that and replicating that down in and around the Whalers Way area. So I don't know if this video will work, but there we go. For those of you who caught that, that was the second launch from Kaniba back in September 2020. So that is a solid rocket motor, and I'll see if I can play that again for you. Oh, no, let's try to do that. There we go. And you can see how quickly a solid rocket works, given, as I said, you light it and off she goes. Oops, how do I go to the next one? There we go. So this is my final slide. So where to next? So some of the interesting developments that have come about over the last few months is that we're starting to see Australian federal world connecting into the broader space environment. So just recently, the federal government announced that they would be exploring a technology safeguard agreement with the United States of America. Now, the US is the biggest space industry in the world, and this opens up a fantastic opportunity both for Southern Launch to attract American launches, but very importantly, it allows Australian space industry to tap into that larger market as well. We then have the ability to control our own sovereign capability around space launch, and this is where we hope to have future launches out at Whalers Way. Very importantly, we're starting to see more and more investment in space as a whole, coming both from state and federal government and through the civil investment world as well. And that ties in very closely to the research and development that and the products and services that are coming out of space-derived technologies, and how that helps to shape our capability, we humans and we Australians' capability into the future. And on a personal note, we Southern Launch are really looking forward to getting the Whalers Way facility permanently approved, and then it helps us to that then provides us with the stepping stone to demonstrate how space launch and the broader environment can coexist. And a very good example of this is out at Cape Canaveral in the US, which is home to one of the biggest areas of breeding bald eagles. So trying to take a feather out of their cap, so to speak, and demonstrate how we as Australians can do the same thing here back home. So quite a lot of stuff going on in our nation and abroad on how the broader space industry here can grow, and the bit of work that we in Southern Launch are doing to hopefully achieve that. So there ends my slides. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening. I think I'll go back to you, Chris. I'll stop sharing.
Great. Thank you so much, Lloyd, and very informative. And so anyone with legitimate questions on the project, we'll come to the comments in a little bit. But I suppose, Lloyd, in terms of stakeholder engagement that you've got, I just wanted to cover off on sort of four key areas. Was things on that regulatory framework, because you really are, from when we look at the industry, the launch capability, you're kind of there at the forefront, and that puts you out in front of quite a lot of conjecture as well. So there's a lot of things you have to deal with, but I just wanted to cover off maybe the regulatory framework, the technical framework operating here in Australia, and then the skills framework. And I saw, you're hiring as well. You've just had an engineer highlighted as well. So there's a lot of promotion around the skills, and then we'll come to the environment and how you have to manage those stakeholders as well. The regulatory framework, and then it's also as a startup. So that's another thing is, so this isn't just a normal startup business. This is a new startup in a existing sort of industry, but with new legs. So yeah, we'll start off with the frameworks that you're dealing with, the regulatory frameworks, the support that you're getting, any observations there that, you're just finding that's just another battle in its own right.
Well, the good thing is that the Australian Space Agency, who are the head regulator for space activities, they're actually working very closely with industry now to understand how industry approaches the development of these new technologies. So together now, we're working very closely with the agency to start streamlining these application procedures. Understandably, the VSO-1 launch campaign was the first time the Space Act had ever been used. So a lot of teething problems, not really the word, but a brand new regulator with a brand new act and a brand new industry just takes a bit of time to settle down. So a lot of discussions with the Space Agency to understand those interplays, but we were able to navigate through it. And to achieve the VSO-1 launch campaign, we actually had to secure 32 different permits from state and federal governments. So a lot of coordination there where we had to be at the very, we had to be in the center of that and help the different organizations come together to realize this. So look, we've now got a recipe, so to speak, and we look forward to applying that into the future.
Yeah, and I take it will be that refinement ongoing. The other one was the technology that you're using. There is a question, will you have a static engine test facility? How have you gone with the technology, which is sort of here in Australia versus overseas, and how much you're developing in your own right?
Yeah, so we actually partner with a Queensland company with their static engine test facilities. So a lot of the companies that come and approach us and say, hey, we'd like to launch from your site, we say, cool, show us that you have a static engine test or a couple of engine tests to prove the propulsion system, and then let's talk. And if they haven't done that, we send them up to Queensland. So, but it's Australia, we're very keen to see these propulsion technologies developed. I mean, that is the very heart of a rocket system. And hopefully in the next couple of months and years, we will catch up to the rest of the world.
Yeah. And how are you finding, there's another comment there, excellent project, Sydney-based engineer, and I think you've got some positions out for engineers. How are you finding the recruitment process here in Australia for engineers? Yes,
no, it's very interesting. For everyone's awareness, I think we're currently 25 staff, and we've got three ads out at the moment as well. So just growing at a rate of knots, which is fantastic. The key one for us is getting people who understand startup environments. As you said, it's very different to everyday business. You know, we project priorities change very rapidly, opportunities come up, and so we're always looking for people who are willing to jump in and take charge, take control of areas of work. And for the most part, Aussies love that.
Yep.
And so no, it's been great to engage with people as we work to fill those roles.
Well, I saw the young fella in the picture. I think it was on LinkedIn or something. I was like, wow, he looks so young, but that's awesome, isn't it? So I think giving that opportunity for young Australians to think, okay, there's an opportunity here in space. I'm an engineer.
Exactly, and you know, some of the interesting stats. The Apollo project, the mean age was about 25, right?
Wow.
So and there weren't people with 50 years of space heritage who could have done those roles, right? But they had to find young people who would go, let's give it a bash. Let's see what the problems are and overcome them and work forward. And yeah, it's great.
They've got the energy required. Now let's deal with the environment you've got, which is, you know, and again, there's a couple of comments which are just kind of maybe discredits a protest. Nothing wrong with a legitimate protest with environmental concerns, and I think that's another thing you've got on top of your plate here of, you know, environmentalists will be your stakeholders here, and you're dealing with the local Indigenous community, another stakeholder. So again, it takes you outside the realm of a normal technology startup. So yeah, how are you finding that sort of approach and engagement there, and where do you think you need to sort of, yeah, what's your touch points there?
No, good, really good question. And so this is where we've been very lucky in that we, right at the start of the project, started to reach out to some of the industry leading experts in the environmental field to understand, well, what's out at Whalers Way? How is the site currently managed? How could it be managed differently or better into the future? And so we started a very scientific, science-based analysis of the site, and that then culminated in our environmental impact statement. It's quite a bruiser of a document. And what's really good about that is that all of that research that's been done to date has followed scientific processes and it's now out in the public realm. So it's akin to developing a huge journal article, right? It's been peer reviewed, and now it's going through the review cycle, which is the federal government, the South Australian federal government for that matter. And they are the ultimate regulators with this type of activity. So it's been interesting to see them coming back, asking for further clarification on different points. But for the most part, actually agreeing with the processes that were followed to then measure the particular outcome. So because we started on such a strong foundation, a strong scientific foundation, there's actually been quite a lot of acceptance for the results that we've put together. And that then has allowed us to go, well, if we know what's out there, we can start to develop proposals to improve that local environment. So when we were out on site for VSO1, we put out critter cams, around the launch site, and lo and behold, we even saw feral animals with animals caught in its mouth, going off, and so things like that, which is quite, I'd say, alarming, because you don't see that during the daylight hours. But those are the type of things that we'll now be able to start to work to eradicate. We've always welcomed the different environmental groups to join us with implementing a lot of these things, and that invitation still stands. So
I think there's an education. Yeah, there's an education there,
yes.
and obviously not so much collaboration, but some partnership on what the impact is as well. And then I think there's a difference between where you are now and where the complex might get to, and all sorts of different things underway. All I would say as an observer is, I think as long as you're constructive, then you won't have a problem. The moment I think what we've seen here in Australia is a bit of the fear factor kick in, and they lose all credibility. So there's nothing wrong with a legitimate protest. We did cover off on a net zero launch last week as well, and the impacts of space on the environment, and not just on a physical environment, but atmospheric environments as well. So I think it's something that the whole space sector has kind of gone, oh, okay, there's a lot of talk around climate change and environmental impacts, and then space. And I think, it's unfortunately, it's just another layer, to go through in terms of an industry, but it's one here in Australia you'll no doubt have to face. So no thanks to any of the comments that were made that were not constructive, but to those that made constructive comments, then there is nothing wrong with that, and we're fine with that. So look, there's no more questions, Lloyd, and on that, we'll keep in touch with you again. You've got till next year as well with more plans. It's such a shame when you see a launch not take place, but again, I think it also shows the risks that are involved as well, right?
When we were doing a wash-up with one of the regulators, I stood up at the end and said, "Oh, space is hard." And one of their head regulators added on, "But not impossible."
Very good.
We've got to keep focused on that, and work together to realize this. So yeah.
Well, look, and just to those making comments, welcome to reach out to us here. We'll have a chat to you and just see, because there's nothing wrong with making a comment if it's your real name. We put our real names to things, so we'll see. But it's an interesting point to make. But I think it needs to come in with some facts and some figures, which is obviously your role as well. So Lloyd Damp, what I'll do is I'll swap screens there and bring you up, and we'll close off the session. So thank you to Lloyd Damp, Chief Executive with Southern Launch, and our Southern Launch update. Thank you. Appreciate you joining us here at the ASITI Festival of Space.
No, thanks so much, Chris, for having me, and to everybody who listened in today. Much appreciated.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And to the audience staying through, we do have our next session on Friday, the investment of space, or investment in space, and we'll follow on from there. So thank you very much for joining us today. These sessions are available on ASITI.space, and our next session, here we go, Investing in Space, is on Friday at 12 o'clock. with Mike Harms, Rebecca Shrimpton, Tim Parsons, Bill Bartrey, and Stephen Carroll will moderate that particular session. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.